Hi, this is Simon Canlish and welcome to another marvellous video. Horror fans have a special place for horror anthologies in their hearts, starting with the iconic ones such as Tales from the Crypt and Creepshow. The good news is that fans now have a new and exciting addition to the genre, Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. Del Toro has often been considered to be a genius in the world of horror, and his creature designs have been nightmare fuels for fans and audiences all over the world. There are 8 distinct horror stories in this collection, and they are said to all push the boundaries of the traditional horror subgenre. Described as both intelligent and horrifying, Del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities is a collection of the Oscar-winning filmmaker's individually hand-picked stories. In this video, we will take a look at the 3rd episode of the series, The Autopsy. What happens to all those miners? Well, keep watching to find out. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. So how does the story unfold? This 50 or so minute long short story revolves around an unexplained explosion in a mine shaft, the death of innocent miners and subsequent disappearances of people. The tragedies clearly affected the people living in the town and sent them into a long period of mourning. To try and find some answers, the town sheriff calls in his friend, a pathologist. However, what the pathologist discovers while conducting his autopsies is something we will not forget about easily. This episode is big on the body horror front, with bodies being cut open left, right and center. So if you're queasy and squeamish, then this might not be the one for you. At the very beginning of the short film, Guillermo del Toro introduces the idea that there may be life outside of just as humans in the universe by talking about shooting stars and cosmic beings. This makes it quite evident that there is definitely going to be some alien action in this short film. Regardless of whether you actually believe in aliens or not, there is always a possibility that life exists beyond just the Earth, because the universe as we know it is infinitely large and always expanding. While this might be a comforting thought for some, it is very scary thought for many, because let's face it, we fear the unknown. And this episode gives us further reason to fear the unknown. The opening scene of the David Pryor directed, David S. Goyer written, and Michael Shea story-based short, The Autopsy, features a man named Joe Allen setting off a deadly explosion in a mine leading to the death of many miners. For the post-mortem examination of the deceased miners, Sheriff Nate Craven calls in his longtime friend and pathologist Dr. Carl Winters, hoping that he would be able to throw some light on what exactly was going on in his town. However, over the course of a few months, what Dr. Winters discovers forces him and the rest of us to reevaluate everything we believe to be true about the cosmos. The audience is treated to a lengthy montage of the town in eternal mourning due to the deaths of the miners and many unresolved missing person cases following the strange explosion. The fact that Carl reveals that he has stomach cancer adds to this morbidity, and the director succeeds in making the audience also feel the enormous sense of loss that the town is going through. We learn that Sheriff Nate is concerned that the bereaved families won't be able to bury their loved ones if they aren't evaluated and given compensation by the government. And Carl's observation will determine how much compensation is given. Therefore, Cabinet of Curiosities continues to focus on issues facing regular people, much like the first 2 episodes did. However, before we start the slicing and cutting, Carl requested that Nate describe to him what happened before the explosion. Well, Nate launches into a terribly harrowing story about bizarre unsolved murders and disappearances. He first recalls discovering a dead body in the woods that had been brutally butchered, the skin flayed with perfect butcher-like precision. In fact, the nature of the murder was such that it brought up more questions than answers. They then further lost 2 more victims in an attempt to lure the killer into taking the body. Clearly, the investigation was not going to play out how Sheriff Nate wanted it to. Later, however, he did get a clue, as it was determined that the dead body belonged to a man named Abel Doherty, who had been abducted from a pub by Alan, the man who set off the explosion in the mine. However, the way the situation panned out was not like a typical kidnapping. It resembled a vampiric one, with elements of hypnosis and mind control. Here's what happened. Abel encountered a man named Eddie Sykes in a bar called Trucker's Tavern while drinking a pint. However, as he called out to the man he thought he was familiar with, the situation turned altogether sinister. The man he thought was his friend, Eddie, told him firmly that he was a man named Joe Allen instead. The conversation takes a weird turn as a man gaslights Abel into thinking that he is his friend. He is just not Eddie Sykes. However, when Abel asks him genuinely what is going on, Allen tells him that he would let Abel in on a secret. But for that, Abel would have to come with him. Allen hypnotizes Abel into leaving the pub without creating a scene. He tells Abel to put his beer glass down and urges Abel to let Allen take him home as he stared into his eyes, both of which had sparkling pupils. In addition, Allen's voice changed from its usual tone to something that makes you think of Bene Gesserit from Dune or Gary Oldman's vampire voice from Bram Stoker's Dracula, which apparently put Abel under a spell. Along with Allen, he left the tavern and was later discovered dead in a nearby woodland. So certainly everything at this point pointed out to being a vampire movie. The lack of blood in Abel's dead body, the eyes, the voice, and the pale, drained skin. This was clearly not a run-of-the-mill murder. Something sinister had to do with it. The sheriff continued narrating the events of this investigation as he tells Winters that they managed to track down Eddie Sykes, otherwise known as Joe Allen. They tracked down where he was staying on rent and entered his room to check if something was fishy, and boy, did they find something weird in there. Winters came across a weird, growling, hairy alien orb and decided to take it with him, since it was definitely not normal, and he felt that it had something to do with all of the deaths and disappearances in the town. After acquiring the orb, he went to the mine Joe Allen, or Eddie Sykes, was known to be working in to ask for him. It didn't take long for them to spot him, but when they did, he behaved in the most deranged manner. He ran to Winter's cop car, broke the window with a rock, took the hairy orb and made a run for it. However, we know how this panned out. He ran into the mine shaft with the orb, went deep into the mines and then set off the explosion that killed the miners. Hence the hairy orb, which Allen later took off to set the mine explosion, was discovered by Nate and his subordinate officer in Allen's apartment, adding a new dimension to the tale. Let's just take a minute here to savor the match-cutting and pitch-perfect editing that occurs in the opening 20 minutes of this hour-long film before discussing the plot in more detail. That's largely thanks to Pryor and his team's shot selection and coverage, as well as the fact that they were permitted to use so many insert shots. The majority of these images most likely don't offer any extra details, but play a major role in creating a chilling atmosphere for the viewer. Nate thus asked his old friend Carl to perform an autopsy on the miners' bodies, since he has no other choice and nowhere else to turn for answers to the strange circumstances surrounding the case. Carl agrees, since he finds everything about the case and the infamous Joe Allen incredibly fascinating. Nate then takes Carl to the makeshift morgue that the sheriff's department had created for the purposes of carrying out the autopsies so that Dr. Carl could get started. Seeing that his friend was evidently tired, Carl asked Nate to get some rest and meet him in the morning to discuss whatever Carl would find after carrying out the autopsies. He hoped to have at least gone through 2 or 3 bodies at that time. Nate agrees with his friend and goes back home, leaving him alone with 10 dead bodies that hold terrifying secrets. After Nate leaves, Carl turns on his audio recorder, gets everything ready and begins recording and taking notes of the bodies. He examines Miller's body first and discovers no anomalies. He notes that the cause of the death was cross asphyxiation and starts moving the corpse back to the refrigerator. However, something very primal inside him was on high alert and was telling him that he had to leave. Upon hearing his conscience urging him to leave the mortuary and flee, the hair on the back of his neck stands up. However, he continues on with the autopsies due to his inability to determine why his conscience was telling him to run away and leave the bodies alone. As we watch, Carl wonders out aloud if Allen's real goal was actually to destroy the hairy orb, not blow up the mine shaft, and that Allen himself wasn't generally attempting to flee from the cops while cutting open Jackson. Instead of receiving a response to his musings, he discovers a strange cut on Jackson's body, and once he opens up the corpse, he notices that none of his internal organs have any blood in them. Somehow they were all completely drained of blood. He notes the strange occurrence, and after stitching him up, Carl moves on to the next corpse, Brady. He discovers a similar puncture wound on him once more, along with no blood in any of the internal organs. Carl therefore hypothesizes that Allen's stomach is where all the blood is actually located, reinforcing the vampire notion. But when he finally goes to the refrigerator compartment to remove Allen, he experiences the shock of a lifetime. Allen's body starts twitching, and to Carl's horror, he stands up from his trolley and moves in Carl's direction. Carl is so shocked by this strange event that he drops the scalpel he was holding, which Allen then likely uses to cut open the sutures in his mouth. While he does this, we catch a fleeting glimpse of something with tentacles moving within his mouth. That ends the controversial vampire hypothesis and gives rise to the theory of the extraterrestrial vampire. As Allen stands up, up and confronts Carl, tentacles come out from his mouth and knock Carl out cold. Carl wakes up, strapped to a gurney under the operating light in the makeshift morgue, and Alan, or rather the alien inside him, begins speaking to him. The fact that Alan admits that his true form is little and repulsive pretty much makes it clear to Carl and the audience that he is an extraterrestrial traveler from space who is inhabiting Alan's body. He claims that the hairy orb served as his ship, which he shattered in order to maintain his secrecy and the mystique surrounding his species. Alan informs Carl that he will soon enter and love his body, and even claims to be able to smell Carl's stomach cancer. That's more repulsive than a typical vampire consuming blood, considering that Alan all but admitted that he made his host humans ingest other humans' organs. Anyway, after capturing Carl, the alien begins to get ready to inhabit Carl's body by transferring himself from Alan's body. This entire scene is extremely uncomfortable to watch, since the alien traveler speaks as Alan, controlling Alan's body, its thoughts, movements, and motivations. The alien further says that because of the nature of Carl's job, which involves carrying out autopsies, Alan can consume the blood of the dead victims that are brought to the doctor for autopsies. Hence, Alan views Carl as a fantastic vessel. Carl starts to delay the inevitable, stalling in hopes that Nate would show up as promised. Upon realizing Alan is going to cut himself open to stimulate an autopsy before transferring his alien body form into his body, Carl says early on in the movie that his cancer means he doesn't have much time left. Because he is a man of science and understands that it is a normal and inevitable part of life, he is also not sorry and disappointed about it. That kind of thinking is put to use in his final moments, when he understands that the only way to stop Alan's destruction is to cut off his vital sensory organs as soon as the alien enters his body. He then proceeded to slit his own neck and make sure that he would bleed out, ensuring that the alien would starve inside a dead host. Undoubtedly a different procedure. Carl succeeds in trapping Alan and getting the job done. The alien claims that in order to survive, he will immediately take possession of Nate, but Carl reassures him that he will pass away in his body and that it will no longer be a mystery, and that he and his species exist. Because the tape which Carl was using to record his observations regarding the autopsy contains every word the alien had spoken through Alan, in order to guarantee the alien's demise and reveal the identity of a true killer, he would also scroll the phrase, "Play tape burn me," on his corpse using his own blood. Thus, Alan's arrogance becomes his fatal weakness. The tape recorder is the most obvious detail in the room, but he is so sure of himself that he overlooks it. It appears as the credits roll that Nate did play the tape upon seeing his dear friend dead in a horrible manner, and that the alien does pass away within Carl. Nevertheless, it is impossible to say for sure because Pryor leaves it open-ended on purpose. Last but not least, we have to talk about Abraham and Robert's extremely breathtaking performances. The speech mixing and camera selection are beautifully done to make us concentrate on what these two beings are saying during the final few minutes of their game of wits. Considering how thought-provoking their arguments are, it is both unsettling and intriguing to listen as they discuss how one can still be helpful after death. Naturally, Carl is talking about utilizing his last moments to stop the destruction of humanity, while Alan is talking about killing someone so he may start killing other people. All in all, this short film will definitely blow your mind. It is a visual spectacle and creates a tense environment. The elements of horror are brought in via unexplained deaths, disappearances, and the entire morgue sequence. As the bodies are cut up one by one, the flesh squelching and bones crackling is enough to unnerve any viewer. This one is an absolute must for any horror fan and is available for viewing on Netflix currently. What do we know about the mysterious alien? The alien is definitely a major character of this story, so here is all that we know about it. As far as appearances go, once the entity comes out of Alan's body in an effort to transfer itself from Alan to Carl, we see that it is a weird and slimy squid-like creature with multiple tentacles. It also has what seems to be a gigantic eye, but it does not work. The alien itself admits that their races does not possess anything their hosts do, meaning they don't possess any external senses or sensory organs, nor they evolved the necessary things needed to move and keep themselves alive as independent creatures. They are in essence extraterrestrial blood-sucking parasites. Carl points this out as he tells the alien that it is a pathetic parasite, even worse than a cancer because they had no senses, no abilities, just an inbuilt urge to find a host and keep eating men forever. Horrifyingly, what the alien later divulges to Carl shows that the species is also extremely sadistic, and they feel like like humans are lesser than them. It says that their alien species has evolved past the need for mobility and senses because they are of a much higher intellect and thus are superior to the humans they use as hosts. In fact, this particular alien revels in knowing that he can control humans. They enter the human body via orifices such as the nostrils or the mouth while they are in their larvae stages. Once inside, they feast on the blood and grow in size. Due to the nature of what they consume, they are tasked with constantly finding more and more human bodies to drain the blood out of. Thus, they keep their hosts somewhat alive. It is a skin-crawling realization once the viewers learn that Alan, or Eddie Sykes, was conscious this whole time. The alien made sure that he was aware of what was happening to him and what was being done to him, making it an excruciating ordeal for a man who just wanted to see comets and believe in aliens. He also proudly admitted to Carl that while he was drinking the blood of other miners trapped in the shaft after the explosion, he kept them alive as well, making sure to whisper into their brains how and why they were dying. This shows the terrifying sadistic nature of this alien that finds pleasure and satisfaction in torturing its prey. According to the alien, their species has been inhabiting men for millennia. In fact, it was them that had caused men to go mad, wage wars, and create disasters. The alien was confident in its own abilities and was sure that it had come up with a foolproof plan to carry out a successful transfer into Carl's body. While the transfer was successful, it never anticipated Carl's innate humanity, something it knew nothing about and simply could not fathom. Thus, in the end, its arrogance resulted in its death. This film is expertly made, and the lore of the alien is succinctly and effortless added to the episode via the beautiful use of conversation in the second act. It has an excellent cinematography and an extremely compelling story. The spectator is undoubtedly caught off guard by the jump fright when Alan comes back to life, and the gore and brutality combine to create a very unsettling episode. This entire series is a gift for horror fans this Halloween season. What did you think about the third episode of Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities? Well, tell us in the comments section below, and if you've liked our content, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe this Halloween.